I need to write this down. Maybe someone will finally believe me. The red memory came back tonight, searing itself into my mind like hot iron. But it wasn't mine. Not entirely. It felt as if another man's life had been poured into me, stitched into the folds of my brain, until I couldn't tell where his ended and mine began. Images intruded without permission, hands that looked like mine but dripped with blood, doors I'd never opened yet somehow recognized, voices bubbling through water as if I'd drowned in them before. Each flash wasn't recollection, it was invasion, and yet it sat inside me like it belonged there. Pixel sensed it before I did. He always does. One moment he was curled by the radiator, purring softly, his tail flicking lazily in half-sleep. The next, he snapped awake, his entire body stiff, ears pressed flat, fur bristling as though the room had turned hostile, his green eyes locked on the far corner, wide and unblinking. I followed his stare. The wallpaper there hung in peeling strips, faded and sickly, but tonight it pulsed with a faint red glow. Not steady. Not safe. It flickered irregularly, like a dying heartbeat. Each pulse spilled across the walls, painting the room in bruised crimson. Every flash made the alien memory inside me flare hotter, sharper, as if the motel itself was syncing with the thing that had been carved into my mind. The Whispering Pines Motel should be quiet at night, but lately it feels alive, alive in a way that feeds on me. The neon sign outside sputtered, refusing to die past 11:15 like it should. I found myself counting the flickers. 3, pause, 5, pause, then a frantic stutter. Not random, not chance. A code. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The parking lot stretched out empty, too empty. Asphalt gleamed wet that the sky was bone dry. Shadows clung to the cars in stretched, unnatural shapes. One of them twitched, sharp, sudden. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I dropped the curtain, but the sensation of being watched didn't leave. It pressed in from every angle. The air grew thick, heavy with mildew, and metallic like rusted copper. Even the creak of the floorboard seemed wrong, echoing too long, as though someone unseen was walking in rhythm with me. Pixel growled, low and guttural, his tail lashing. He didn't look at me. He didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the corner. That was when I realized he wasn't afraid at all. He was angry. I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping a glass, running the tap just to hear something ordinary. But when I looked up, the mirror was already fogged, dense, wet, as though someone had been standing there moments before, breathing heavy against the glass. My skin went cold as the letters began to bleed out across the mist. They formed slowly, deliberately, dragging downward in thick strokes like a fingertip dipped in paint. But it wasn't paint. It was darker, thicker. The smell reached me before the word finished. Iron, blood. The letters spelled themselves into the glass with sticky precision. Remember Michael. I froze, the glass slipping in my hand. My first thought was that I was bleeding. Maybe my nose, maybe some hidden cut. I touched my face in panic. Nothing. My skin was pale and clean. The smear on the glass was not mine. I pressed a fingertip to the letters, cold, sticky, and when I pulled back, the residue clung like glue. The smell was sharp, undeniable. Someone had been here. Someone wanted me to see this. The memory inside me surged again, boiling over into jagged visions. A man in a white coat forcing me against cold metal. A door marked 237 glowing at the end of a corridor. Equations scrawled across transparent walls that dissolved the instant I blinked. Screams muffled beneath water, bubbling up and then popping into silence. And through it all, red, spreading, staining, drowning everything until it was all I could see. Pixel's hiss shattered the images. I ran back into the room. The glow in the corner had intensified, crawling across the peeling wallpaper in curling lines and intersecting circles until they formed a sigil. My stomach knotted. I shouldn't have recognized it, but I did. The motel's hum deepened into a droning vibration, shaking the window, rattling my teeth. The neon outside strobed red-blue-red, syncing perfectly with the pulsing pattern on the wall. My vision blurred, stuttered, as if the room itself was blinking too slowly. I begged Pixel to come closer. He didn't move. His eyes gleamed in the half-light, fixed to the corner, unblinking. And then he spoke. Or maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was the motel twisting his throat into sound. "You're not remembering." The words cut through me like a blade. My chest froze. "You're being remembered." The air collapsed around me. Pressure crushed my ribs. My knees buckled. My breath came in shallow bursts. From the bathroom came the final smear of blood, dragging itself across the glass as if an unseen hand finished the sentence. "Remember Michael, or be forgotten." I thought I'd survive the night. The message in blood, the voice that came from Pixel's throat, the crushing weight of those words. I told myself if I could just make it until morning, maybe it would loosen its grip. But the whispering pines doesn't let go. It doesn't give peace. When I woke after a few restless hours, my eyes landed on the floor near the door. Something had been slipped under it while I slept. A folded sheet of paper, thin and yellowed at the edges. My stomach tightened before I even touched it. I picked it up with shaking hands. At first it looked blank, but as I unfolded it, the writing revealed itself. Letters, scratched in harsh strokes, too precise to be rushed but too jagged to be calm. A new rule. Rule 9. Do not answer if the phone rings at 3:03 a.m. I read it over and over, the words carving into me deeper. Each time. Who had put this here? Who was still writing the rules? Until now, the list had always been the same. Brittle sheets taped behind the counter. This was different. Someone was adding to it. Someone close enough to slip paper beneath my door without me hearing. My mind kept circling the same thought. What happens at 3:03? Why that exact time? The phone sat on the nightstand beside the bed, an old rotary model that should have been a relic decades ago. I stared at it, its coiled cords slack and lifeless, the receiver resting in place like a black tongue. It hadn't rung once since I took the job. Now the thought of it ringing made my throat close. The rule wasn't a warning, it was a countdown. I tried to distract myself, tried to busy my hands with meaningless motions, straightening the sheets, pacing the room, feeding Pixel from the half-empty can of food I kept beside my duffel bag. But every second dragged heavier, ticking toward the hour I dreaded. I checked the clock again and again. 2:57, 2:59. The silence grew so sharp it hummed in my ears. And then it rang. The sound split the air like an axe, harsh, mechanical, shrill. The bell inside that phone screamed with a force that didn't belong to old wiring. It didn't just ring, it howled. Pixel bolted beneath the bed, his claws scraping the wood. My chest tightened as I stared at the phone, frozen, knowing the paper's words were clear. Do not answer. The ringing didn't stop. It didn't fade. It only grew sharper, drilling into my skull. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was inside me, vibrating bone. Each ring seemed longer than the last, stretched like rubber about to snap. I counted them despite myself. 1, 2, 3. Each one pulling me closer. By the 6th, I was trembling, teeth chattering. By the 9th, my hand hovered inches above the receiver. And then I heard it. My own voice, not from inside my head, but from the phone itself, bleeding through the ringing, threaded between the shrieks of the bell. It was me. My cadence, my breath, my tone, calling from the other side. Pick up! The sound nearly buckled my knees. I staggered back, but the voice followed, pressing against the inside of my skull like a whisper meant for my bones. Pick up, Michael. We don't have much time. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head, whispering, No, no, no. But the voice grew louder, clearer, like someone was leaning against the other side of the line, mouth pressed against the receiver. Pick up, or you'll lose him. My eyes snapped open. Pixel hissed from under the bed, his green eyes glowing like tiny lanterns in the dark. My breath froze. The voice dropped lower, darker, steady as stone. If you hang up, Pixel dies. The words broke something in me. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the floor, staring at the phone as if it might leap at me. My cat, the only anchor I had left in this nightmare, the only reason I'd stayed through the rules and the shadows, now dangled by the thread of this call. My pulse hammered, drowning out everything else. The rule said, do not answer, but the voice said if I didn't, Pixel would pay the price. The phone rang again, one sharp strike that rattled the lamp beside it. I felt the weight of choice press down so heavy it was hard to breathe. My hand trembled as it hovered over the receiver. My skin prickled as though touching it would burn. The paper crumpled in my other fist, the words etched into my palm as if carved there. Do not answer. My eyes darted back to Pixel. He was crouched low, ears flat, fur bristled, staring at me with a look I'd never seen before, pleading, terrified, as if he knew exactly what that voice could do. I closed my eyes. The phone screamed again, a cry that shook the air around me. My hand slipped lower until my fingertips brushed the receiver. Don't, Pixel hissed. It wasn't a meow. It was an animal. It was language, raw and broken, spat from his throat like gravel. My eyes snapped open, my breath tearing from me. His pupils burned, his body trembling. He wasn't just warning me, he was begging. The phone rang one final time, louder, deeper, as if the entire motel had become its bell. I yanked my hand back. My breath tore out of me in a ragged cry. The ringing stopped. Just like that. Silence dropped heavy, suffocating. The paper in my hand crumbled to dust. The words dissolved as though they had never been written. But the voice lingered, even in the silence, whispering at the edges of my thoughts. You chose wrong, Michael. You always do. I told myself I wouldn't open that door. I promised I'd follow the rules, that I'd obey every warning scratched into paper and every whisper that leaked through the walls. But after the phone stopped, after the silence fell heavy, my eyes kept drifting to the end of the hallway. Room 237. That number had pulsed through my visions, carved into my skull, etched into the nightmares I couldn't escape. It wasn't just a room. It was waiting. And I knew, if I didn't face it, it would come for me anyway. The corridor stretched longer than I remembered. The carpet squelched damp beneath my shoes, though no water seeped through. Each step sank deeper, as though the building itself was trying to slow me down. The lights above me flickered in spasms, bursts of white that painted the hall like lightning before collapsing into shadow again. My heart pounded against my ribs. I passed doors I had seen 100 times, yet tonight they all seemed wrong. Handles bent at odd angles, peepholes wider than they should be, as if the rooms inside were watching me. When I reached it, the numbers on the door were not fixed. They shifted, 2 curling into a 3, then back again, 7 melting into a 1 before snapping into place. Still, I knew it was 237. My hand hovered over the knob. The cold seared through my palm before I even touched it. Pixel hissed behind me, claws scraping against the floor, but he didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew it was useless. Maybe he knew I was already caught. The door opened on its own. The room inside was wrong. The walls curved where they should have been straight, as though the whole space had been built from melted wax. The clock on the far wall drooped downward, its face sliding like soft clay, the hands bending in circles that made no sense. The furniture slumped as if gravity had chosen favorites. Chairs sagged into the carpet, a lamp bowed like a tired head. And the window. God, the window didn't look out onto the empty parking lot. It showed me something else. The lot was there, but the cars were rusted hulks, eaten alive by time that hadn't passed yet. The asphalt was cracked, weeds piercing through like veins, and in the middle of it all, I saw Pixel. His small body twisted, broken, lying motionless under the shadow of the flickering neon. His green eyes stared blankly, glassy, reflecting nothing. My stomach lurched, my knees weakened. That was the future. That was what was waiting if I stayed. I staggered back, desperate to tear my eyes away. But then I saw the desk. There was a man seated there, hunched over, a pen scratching across paper. My breath caught. His shoulders, his hair, the curve of his jaw. I knew them. They were mine. He was me. The doppelganger didn't look up. His hand moved steadily, dragging lines of ink across a notebook that looked painfully familiar. The same leather cover, the same worn edges, the same bent corner from when I'd spilled coffee on it weeks ago. It wasn't possible, but it was undeniable. He was writing in my journal. I stepped closer, every muscle screaming to run, every instinct refusing to obey. The air grew heavier with each step, thick as tar, sticking to my skin. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. "Who are you?" The other me didn't stop writing. He didn't glance up. His pen carved another line into the page before he finally answered, his voice flat, steady, identical to mine. "I'm what you leave behind." My throat closed. The room swam. I forced the words out. This isn't real. You're not me." At that, he stopped. Slowly, he lifted his head. When his eyes met mine, I felt my chest collapse. They were my eyes, yes, but wrong. Too sharp, too steady, filled with a certainty I didn't possess. He studied me like a scientist observes a rat, a faint curl of disgust tugging his mouth. "You think you're remembering?" He leaned closer, the pen still in his hand, black ink dripping from the tip like blood. "But you're not. You're rewriting." The words slammed into me harder than any blow. Rewriting. The memories that tore through me, the blood on the mirror, the voices in the dark. They weren't pieces of a forgotten past. They were edits, corrections. My life wasn't returning to me. It was being rewritten line by line, reshaped into something else. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, clutching my own journal to my chest. "That's mine. Those are my nights, my words." "Are they?" He tilted his head, and for the first time he smiled. It wasn't joy. It was hunger. "Or are you just living what's already written for you?" Behind him, the window shifted again. Pixel's body twitched, lifted, then dropped lifeless to the cracked asphalt. I cried out, but no sound left my throat. The other me turned back to his notebook, scribbling faster, each stroke syncing with the flicker of the neon outside. The world bent with his pen. My breath came ragged, shallow, trapped in my lungs. I slammed my notebook down on the desk, next to his. The impact made the lamp flicker. He paused, staring at the two books side by side. Identical. Even the handwriting inside matched. I opened mine, desperate to prove a difference. But the pages didn't hold my words. They held his. Every sentence I had written since arriving at Whispering Pines was gone. Overwritten by phrases I didn't remember putting down. Commands, warnings, rules, pages of them filling the book until all that remained was the echo of his hand. My vision blurred. My stomach churned. I could feel the world tilting, shifting, as though reality itself was bending toward his notebook. My doppelganger closed his journal, pressed his palm against the cover, and whispered a final line that carved itself into my ears. "You're not the writer here, Michael. You never were." I thought the worst was behind me after facing my own double in room 237. But the motel doesn't end things. It layers them, one horror on top of another, until you can't breathe. I stood gripping my notebook like it could anchor me, trying to steady my breath. The doppelganger's words, "You're rewriting," still echoed in my skull when the air thickened. It wasn't a draft or a creak in the walls. It was weight, a presence pressing against my chest until I turned. He was there. The man in the black suit, not outside through a window, not across the parking lot, not a shadow caught in the corner of my eye. He was inside the room. His outline devoured the light, his suit sharper than any fabric had the right to be, edges too exact, lines too clean. My eyes slid off his face as though reality refused to record it, yet I knew. It was him, the figure that had been watching me from the beginning. "You remember me," he said, though his mouth never moved. The words didn't travel through the air. They arrived directly in my mind, heavy, cold, absolute. I tried to shake my head to deny it, but the refusal cracked something loose inside me. Memory surged through like broken glass. A white room, sterile and endless, humming with electricity. Wires lowering from the ceiling, suction cups clamped against my skin, needles burrowing into my veins, voices reciting numbers in monotone, and, above me, him standing, motionless, faceless, watching. My throat went dry. I staggered back, whispering, "What did you do to me?" My voice sounded small against the weight of his presence. He tilted his head, a precise, mechanical gesture. "You volunteered." The words dropped into me like stones into deep water, impossible to lift again. I wanted to scream no, to tell him it was a lie, but another shard of memory slid in before I could speak. A pen trembling in my hand, a thick paper contract spread across the table, my name written in desperate ink, Michael Brennan, and beneath it, someone else's neat handwriting, Subject M.B. I tried again to say no, but the images kept coming. Pixel, weak, unmoving, in a glass cage, his tiny body hooked to machines that tracked each shallow breath. I remembered begging, my voice cracking, my hands shaking as I asked them not to hurt him. The man in the suit sliding the contract toward me without touching it, the faceless promise hanging in the air. Pixel would live if I agreed. My signature was a lifeline, the only one I could give. I told myself it was worth it, that I could endure anything if it meant saving him. That was how they got me. "You can't hide from what you've done," the man's voice pressed against my skull. Not cruel, not kind, just final. My knees shook as more flashes pummeled me, my wrists strapped down, my body jerking under electric hums, my teeth clenched until I thought they'd break. Voices murmuring, Subject MB resists memory suppression, increased dosage, and always, always Pixel's cry, muffled by glass. The room warped around me, the drooping clock melted into a heart monitor. The peeling wallpaper shifted into translucent panels, scrawled with equations written backward. The neon hum outside fused with the industrial thrum of machinery buried in my bones. I was no longer sure if I stood in room 237 or the white chamber of my memories. Maybe both. Maybe neither. The man remained unchanged in the center of it all, untouched by the chaos. He reached into his jacket and withdrew something small, metal glinting faintly in the fractured light. A key. Its handle bore an engraved symbol, a circle crossed by a single line that pulsed faintly as though it carried its own heartbeat. He held it out without a word. The space between us didn't feel like it closed, more like it decided to no longer exist. The key was simply there, waiting in his hand. I hesitated, but my fingers moved anyway. The moment I touched it, cold rushed up my arm like liquid mercury. The motel dissolved around me. In its place stretched a corridor I had never seen, yet knew too well, endless rows of doors running in both directions, so many they bent the hallway into a circle. Each door bore a number, some familiar, some foreign, and the brass plates seemed to flicker as if uncertain of themselves. At the very end stood a door with no number, no marking at all, just scarred wood, gouged as though something had clawed to get through. The vision snapped away, leaving me breathless, the key burning in my palm. The man's outline flickered, his form losing coherence like a fading signal. His final words pressed into me, steady and absolute. One door left. Then he was gone. Not with motion, not with sound, just absence, as if he had never been. I collapsed against the desk, clutching the key so tightly its teeth cut crescents into my skin. My breath came ragged, torn from me in shallow bursts. Pixel crept from beneath the bed, fur still bristled, green eyes wide. He looked not at me but at the key, and for a heartbeat I swore recognition flickered in his stare, as though he knew what it meant. I whispered, voice raw. One door left. But which one? The motel gave no answer. The silence felt heavier than words. The key sat in my palm long after the man in the black suit faded from the room. Its teeth dug crescents into my skin, but I couldn't let go. It felt less like an object and more like a verdict, silent, heavy, waiting. Pixel crouched by the bed, watching me with unblinking eyes. He wasn't purring, he wasn't moving, he was just waiting too, as if he already knew what the key meant and dreaded it. The silence pressed in, thicker than before. like the motel itself was holding its breath. I tried to tell myself I wouldn't use it. I tried to convince myself it was just another trick, another hallucination planted by the motel, by the experiment, by whatever I had signed up for, and forced myself to forget. But every step I took dragged me toward the supply closet at the end of the hall. Rule 7 had always been clear. Lock yourself in the supply closet. It had felt arbitrary before, absurd, like a childish dare. Now the words pulsed in my mind, as if written in a blood across the inside of my eyelids. I reached the door and hesitated. The knob felt warmer than it should, as though something had been waiting on the other side. I pressed my forehead against the wood, closing my eyes, trying to summon courage. The key in my hand throbbed faintly with its own pulse. Pixel padded behind me, his claws scratching softly against the carpet. His presence should have comforted me, but instead, it made my stomach twist tighter. Because deep down, I knew the rule didn't mean both of us, it meant one. The air around us shifted, carrying a sound I hadn't heard before. A voice, not a scream, not a whisper, but something between, stretched thin like plastic. Choose now. The words rippled through the hallway, vibrating the walls, making the ceiling lights flicker. My knees weakened. My throat went dry. Pixel pressed against my ankle, trembling, and I wanted to scoop him up, to promise I'd never let anything touch him. But the voice came again, sharper, angrier. Choose now! The knob rattled violently, shaking in my hand though I hadn't turned it. The closet door wanted me inside. At the same time, the shadows thickened around Pixel, curling upward like smoke, reaching for him. I froze, torn between them. If I went in with him, would the closet protect us both? Or would the rules demand only one? The words echoed in my skull, the same words I'd heard since the contract. You can't hide from what you've done. I saw it then, the memory they'd kept buried until this exact moment. Me in the white room, strapped down, while the man in the black suit asked me to decide, not between life and death, but between who would carry the burden. I'd signed for Pixel. I had chosen to let my body, my mind, my memories be rewritten, so his small, fragile life could continue. That was the original bargain. And now the motel was twisting it, forcing me to repeat the choice again, save him or save myself. Pixel looked up at me, his green eyes wide and shining. He meowed once, soft, broken, as if begging. My chest cracked open. I crouched and pulled him into my arms, clutching him tight against my chest. His heart raced beneath his fur, hammering as wildly as my own. The shadows writhed higher, hissing, clawing at the edges of my vision. The knob rattled harder, the door banging against its frame like something furious was demanding entry. My arms trembled. My breath came in jagged bursts. If you lock the door, the voice said, closer now, dripping like poison through my ears, he won't make it out. The words slid inside me, cold and final. If you let him go, you will. I thought I'd made peace with damnation when I signed the contract, when I let them brand me as Subject MB. I thought I'd accepted the burden. But this choice cut deeper. It was no longer about experiments or promises. It was about blood, love, the tiny creature who had been my only anchor in this endless nightmare. My mind split in two. One half screamed at me to survive, to cling to whatever was left of myself, because maybe Pixel would be safer if I wasn't trapped. The other half, the part that still remembered the first time I carried him home, his paws too small to even grip my sleeve, that part refused to abandon him. I stumbled backward with him in my arms, pressing my shoulder against the door. The closet swallowed us in darkness as I shoved it open and slammed it behind us. The key turned in the lock by itself, clicking into place with a finality that rang like a gunshot. The air went cold. The shadows outside screamed against the wood, claws dragging, voices layering into a chorus of rage. Pixel buried his face in my chest, trembling. My own tears spilled hot across my cheeks. The closet was small, suffocating. The smell of bleach and dust filled my lungs. The single light bulb above us flickered and then went out, plunging us into black. My pulse thundered. The voices outside the door rose higher, shrieking, demanding. But the rule was clear. Lock yourself in the supply closet. I had obeyed. For better or worse, I had obeyed. I whispered into the dark, my voice cracking. "It's okay. It's okay. I've got you." But even as I said it, I felt the truth crawling up my spine. The rules never promised safety. They never said the closet would save us, only that I had to lock myself inside. And in the silence that followed, broken only by Pixel's faint, uneven breathing, I realized the choice might not have been about protection at all. It was about proving what mattered most, what I was willing to sacrifice. And the motel. It was listening. The closet was silent for too long. I thought the worst would be outside, the banging, the shadows, the voices. But the moment the lock clicked shut, everything fell still. No claws against the wood, no shrieks leaking through the gaps, just silence, so complete it pressed into my eardrums. Pixel trembled against my chest, his heartbeat wild, his breath sharp and shallow. I whispered to him, trying to steady us both, but the sound felt swallowed whole by the dark. When I finally opened my eyes again, the closet wasn't the same. The shelves had stretched taller, the walls smoother, whiter. The smell of bleach overpowered the dust. My chest clenched. I knew this place. It wasn't a supply closet anymore. It was the white room, the one from my broken memories, the one where I'd been strapped down, where wires had burrowed into me. Somehow, locking myself inside had brought me back here. Pixel leapt from my arms before I could stop him. His paws tapped the floor, echoing like footsteps in a cavern. He didn't cower. He walked ahead, calm, purposeful. My throat tightened as I followed, each step heavier than the last. Monitors lined the walls now, screens flickering with images that made my stomach drop. My own face stared back at me, dozens of versions, each caught mid-scream, mid-beg, mid-collapse. The words scrolled in jagged text at the bottom. Subject MB, Memory Rewrite Cycle 247. I pressed a hand against the glass of one screen, shaking. "This isn't me," I whispered, but my voice cracked. The screen answered with sound, my own voice recorded and broken, begging, "Please don't make me do this again." My knees buckled. I staggered back, colliding with a table that hadn't been there before. Papers scattered across it, pages I knew too well. Each one was a rule. Rule 1, Rule 7, Rule 9. All in my handwriting, though I didn't remember writing them. They weren't instructions to survive. They were scripts, prompts for me to follow, to act out like a trained animal. Pixel sat on the table, staring at me with his green eyes. They didn't look frightened anymore. They looked knowing. For the first time, I wondered if Pixel was even mine, if he had ever been just a cat. His gaze seemed to pierce through me, steady and unwavering, and then the screens around us flickered again. A new line appeared in bold red letters. Anchor detected. Subject MB's rewrite resistance at 89%. Anchor. My stomach turned. Pixel wasn't just my companion. He was the tether that kept me here. The motel, the rules, the cycles, they needed him to hold me in place. Without him, maybe the experiment wouldn't work. Without him, maybe I would slip away. The room shifted again, jerking like film reels cut together wrong. One moment I stood by the table, the next I was strapped down again, wires clamped to my skin, my arms locked in place. I thrashed, screaming, but no one came. The monitors glowed brighter, scrolling faster. Subject MB resists memory suppression, increase cycle, rewrite commencing. The words stabbed across the screens like blades, and then Pixel appeared beside me on the table. But he wasn't trembling, he wasn't small. His body shimmered in the light, splitting into two, then three, then collapsing back into one. His form bent in ways no living thing should, until for a moment I saw not fur but raw light, raw data, wrapped in the shape of a cat. My breath caught. He wasn't just my anchor. He was the key. The voice returned, the one that had chased me through the halls, pressed into my head during the contract. One door left. The words vibrated through the straps, rattling the bolts against the table. I turned my head, gasping, and there it was, the door with no number, just blank wood, scarred by desperate claws. It stood at the far end of the room, glowing faintly with the same pulse as the key still clenched in my fist. I realized then what the rules had been all along. Not survival guides, not warnings. They were tests, measurements of how far I would go, how much I would sacrifice, how much I would resist. Every night I obeyed was another page written, another variable logged, another cycle continued. I wasn't remembering. I wasn't even rewriting. I was being rewritten. Pixel leapt from the table, landing softly on the floor. He padded toward the door, his tail flicking once, deliberate like a signal. My pulse raced. If he crossed through, maybe everything would reset. Maybe that was the final rewrite, or maybe it was the end of him and me with him. The straps around my wrists loosened suddenly, as though the experiment itself wanted to see what I would choose. I tore free, stumbling to my feet, the key burning hot in my palm. The door waited. Pixel sat before it, staring back at me. His green eyes glowed brighter than the monitors, bright enough to sting. He wasn't asking anymore. He was commanding. I walked toward him, each step like dragging stone. The monitors screamed behind me, alarms blaring, voices chanting, cycle breach imminent, subject MB unstable, rewrite failure predicted. My head spun. The white room flickered into the motel hallway, then back again. Neon and bleach, rust and steel, all layered into one impossible place. I clutched the key, teeth gritted, tears burning down my face. Pixel meowed once, loud, clear. The door pulsed in answer. My hand rose, trembling, the key hovering just inches from the lock. For a moment, I swore I could see through the door. Not another room, not the motel, but myself. Sitting at the desk in room 237, pen scratching across the same leather notebook. Writing this, writing me. My breath tore from me. My doppelganger's voice echoed in my skull. You're not remembering. You're rewriting. The key slipped into the lock. The door clicked. The world lurched, colors splitting, walls bending, time tearing like paper. Pixel's body glowed, dissolving into streaks of light, threads unraveling that spun around me like a web. The monitors cracked, sparks spraying, words smearing into nonsense. I tried to scream, but the sound warped, bent, became static. And then silence. The motel reappeared, neat, ordinary, as if nothing had ever happened. The neon outside flickered weakly. My notebook lay open on the bed. Pixel curled at the foot, purring softly, as if asleep. My breath caught when I looked at the first page of the notebook. It didn't hold my handwriting. It wasn't even English. It was a script of numbers and symbols, scrolling endlessly across the page, rewriting itself line by line. My hand trembled as I turned to the mirror on the wall. Words dripped down in fresh red strokes, letters sliding slowly into place. Cycle 248 begins.